Hello, for something different for this patch a day, I'm actually going to start with the same thing that I created in the patch a day 21, so you might want to go back and look at that, or at least I'm going to keep pretty much everything that was there. I'm going to use the average again to get the amplitude from a file and the snapshot. This time, instead of just reading through values from a sound file, this sound that I loaded in here, I'm going to instead read it back using a different file, so that I'm essentially using the amplitude of one file to trigger back the positions in another file where the amplitudes are at least similar. I'm not going to say the same. One of the first things that I'm going to do is, well, I guess the first thing I'm going to do that I should make clear is that I'm going to use a Funbuff here. So I'll just change this col into a Funbuff. And if you have a look at the help on Funbuff, you'll see that the one thing that it does that col doesn't do, and I'm not sure if you can see that looking at this thing, the only one thing that it can do that the col doesn't do is that it will go to the nearest index according to what's stored. So if I store one value 2 at index 1 and value 4 at index 3, if I click on the 2, I'm going to get the value that was stored at index 1, and if I click on a 5 that also isn't stored, I get what's stored at index 3. So it's whatever it sort of runs into on the way to finding the index, I guess. Maybe that's the way to say it, not sure. But yeah, so it essentially will allow us to grab values that are somewhere in the nearest values rather than the absolutely on the ball values. One of the main differences, again, well, I could have left that open, is that it only deals with integers, pairs of numbers. All right, well, it doesn't say integers there, I guess, but I think it probably does if I open up the reference. Yes, messages int, yes, it doesn't deal with floats. You can't see the word float is not in there. All right. So to make it int friendly, I'm going to want to, the snapshot's fine. The problem is that the difference is that I'm going to, instead of storing the index first, I'm going to store the average first, which will be an integer. I'm going to have to turn that from a float into an integer, and then I'm going to also have to store the position as an integer. I'm going to swap those over because I'm going to be referencing the Funbuff according to the average value stored in the Funbuff. And I'm going to want to multiply this average value, well, we can hook up this snapshot for the index, and I'm going to want to multiply this by something kind of large so that the index by amplitude will have some relevance. Obviously it'll just be 0, or in an extreme case 1 if I use just the average output. So we'll multiply it by something. You could use a larger multiply here. I might also make the speed of this thing a little faster, so maybe 20 millisecond. The only other value where that place where that value is important is right there, and in the pack for the line over 20 millisecond segments. Okay, and so like you'll see if you scroll over these outlets, that's the stored element outlet, and that's the index. We're actually interested in the stored element because that's going to be the position stored with the snapshot. So we'll take that and change that up right there. And then we're going to want to have a sound to come in here to trigger this. So I might just get rid of the next message, get rid of that. Again, we're going to be wanting to look at whatever file we have coming in at 20 millisecond intervals. And I'm just going, for this part of it, I'm going to open up a file into SF Play. So I'll make a new object, SF Play. Again, this isn't, since we're not sort of randomly indexing this, it's okay to play it back from the drive. And a message saying open, we'll use the drum loop.aiff, comma, well actually it's .aif, with only one F, drum loop.aif, loop 1 after a comma, another comma with 1 to start the playback, and that will be good for our SF play. Okay, and we're going to use the, again, we're going to use the average times 1,000 for measuring this. Actually, I suppose it might make sense, instead of just multiplying by 1,000, to use the amplitude to dB. And it doesn't really matter that it's going to be negative, so actually in between here I'll use A to dB to make that range even larger. And we're going to do exactly the same thing as there over on this SF play. So average with A to dB times 1,000, and that's going to be used to retrieve values from the Funbuff. I suppose if I was going to be pedantic, I might use trigger I. Some objects don't like handling floats when they are, when it expects integers. Some do. I don't know about about Funbuff, so I'll just won't take my chances. I've already loaded in that file, but again, just to show that this is all real, I can drop my big long file. And if you didn't get that message before, I took it from Freesound, freesound.org, and I owe Digitopia a beer. Okay, so we should be ready to do the storing in Funbuff. I just turn on my ADC and hit the toggle here to get it started. So this is storing in the Funbuff. Unlike the Col, double clicking on it doesn't bring up a window to show you what's being stored. So you kind of just have to take it on good faith that that's actually happening. I'll store just a couple minutes of this. Again, I don't want to bore you to tears, but maybe you're already bored. I'm just waiting for some slightly louder stuff to come in here. Alright, fine, that should be enough. Alright, so now if I turn on this metronome here and click on the message to get this SF play playing, we should be replaying amplitudes that are stored in the Funbuff from the one file, which again comes from Digitopia, and it should be playing back the drum loop amplitudes according, the Digitopia file according to the drum loop amplitudes. Yeah, that doesn't sound like it's looping. That's because I left out a space between loop and the number 1. Okay, so that was it for 21, and I'll see you in 22. Bye.